The last time I discussed the history of Antonia, that prior to Herod's involvement, it used to be a citadel of the Hasmonean kings, who were high priests as well. And the implication was that the construction of the Temple Mount must have been, for the larger part, of pre-Hasmonean times, in case of the conventional layout of the ancient Jerusalem, which is highly unlikely, if not impossible. In this video, I will discuss two events that have taken place in Jerusalem, from which it is possible to derive angles and maximum distances in Jerusalem. And it is important to note that, in contrast to the previous video, this time Josephus was actually on site when those events took place, which of course significantly contribute to the reliability of the details of the given information. Now, the first event is about King Agrippa. We are talking about Agrippa II around the year 60 AD, and Josephus was about 23 years old at the time. Agrippa did want to build a dining room from which he had a good view on the inner court of the temple, so on the altar itself, and the dining room was on Fortress Antonia. Most likely it was on the upper floor of the Hasmonean palace, or maybe even on top of it. And the story is being told in Josephus' Jewish Antiquities, book number 20, chapter 8, paragraph 11. I will read it for you. About the same time, King Agrippa built himself a very large dining room in the royal palace at Jerusalem, near to the portico. Now this palace had been erected of old by the children of the Hasmoneans, and was situated upon an elevation and afforded a most delightful prospect to those that had a mind to take a view of the city, which prospect was desired by the king. And there he could lie down and eat, and thence observe what was done in the temple, which thing, when the chief men of Jerusalem saw, they were very much displeased at it, for it was not agreeable to the institutions of our country or law, that especially that what belonged to the sacrifices. So Agrippa wanted a room with a view, and the priests were not amused by the fact that he could have a look at what was going on in the inner court of the temple. Now, if we have a look at the site, let's do that first in the situation where that is possible. So that is this scenario with the temple here and the Hasmonean palace over here. And we can make a cross section here through Jerusalem, and then we can have a look at that cross section in more detail there. So what do we have? When we have a close look at the cross section at that specific location, we can able to establish what kind of view King Agrippa II had. So we put the eye of King Agrippa in his dining room, and we have a look whether or not it is possible for King Herod to actually see what was going on in the temple. And as you see, that is perfectly possible. He had a good view on the altar, and he could even look on this side. In reality, the temple was slightly farther away, because if you have a look from above, then there is a slight difference, but it doesn't alter the situation. From there, our King Agrippa II had a clear view on the temple. So in this scenario, which is the alternative scenario, it is possible. However, if we have a look at the situation where Antonia is over there, then King Agrippa could have seen absolutely nothing. I will show that for you, what actually was going on there. If Agrippa had his dining room over here, then the temple was about 250 meters away, and the elevation was less favorable as well, so he had no chance to see anything of relevance what was going on in the temple. Even the people who were walking at the other side of the inner court of the temple, I think their head wasn't even seeable. Now, I have found a video on the internet which gives a view from exactly that position, so that is interesting. This palace here is situated in the northwest corner of the Temple Mount, and if you look through the window, you see this. So that is almost exactly as the position where Agrippa would have been in, and the position of the temple is the same as the dome of the rock. And as you can see, not much visible. Too far away, wrong angle. So in this situation, I would say this scenario is not possible. The second story, the second event, is about the fighting that took place in Jerusalem just prior to the arrival of Titus. So we are talking about 69 AD or something. Josephus was about 30 years old at that time and still involved in the sedition, so I think he had a clear view on everything what was going on. And the story is being told in the Jewish Wars. Let me see, that is book 5, chapter 1, paragraph 3. Now, it is a long and complicated story, but what in fact was going on was this, and I will tell that based on the map. Let me see. There were all kind of people fighting within Jerusalem, and the situation was as follows: that Eliezer, some person called Eliezer, was positioned in the temple. We had a second party under the leadership of a John, and he had the upper city, so Eliezer was here. And here was John situated, and the rest of the city was held by Simon. Now, what is being told is that John had an easy job fighting against Simon because the front line was here. They were fighting against each other over this front line. But John had a difficult job fighting Eliezer because here he had to fight an uphill battle. The situation was John could throw stones down to Simon, or throw darts or shoot darts, but in the case of Eliezer, he was fighting an uphill battle, and that makes life a lot more difficult for him. And what is being told here is that he was throwing stones to John, but he was using his weapons of his artillery, in fact, to fight off Eliezer in the temple, and I've looked. Okay, then looking at this, for those darts that were thrown by the ancients came with that force that they went all over the buildings and reached as far as the altar and the temple itself. And the result of that was that a lot of priests died in that battle. And when we look at the cross section again, then I now change to another weergave. Another way of looking at it, we use the same cross section, and I tell you again where Eliezer was situated. Eliezer was in the temple. John was in the upper part of the lower city, and Simon had basically the rest of the city. And John was throwing darts and throwing stones to Simon on this front line here, and he was fighting Eliezer in this front line here. And here he had to use his artillery in order to reach the temple. Now, and there we will have a problem, because when we are looking at that situation, he was throwing his darts or throwing his stones from here, and he had to reach the temple. And the distance we are talking about is something of the order of 350 meters. Now, I can tell you that the heaviest Roman artillery was able to throw 400 meters, but this is not a distance John could reach. And that is the reason why I think that this is not a very likely scenario. While if you compare that to the other scenario, namely that the fortress was over here, the situation is different. Namely, then you have a situation where he was throwing his darts or throwing his stones from here to the temple, and then we are talking about a distance of 150 meters. Well, that is believable. I can imagine having machines of war which reach 150 meters, maybe even 200, but 350 is out of the question. So this story, what is being told here about this ongoing fight in Jerusalem just prior to the arrival of Titus, can only be explained when we assume that the temple was here and it was Fortress Antonia, and makes no sense when we are imagining John throwing his darts from here to here, because then we are talking about 350 meters, and that is way too far. The next time I want to discuss the political context King Herod was in and the logical considerations he must have had before he started spending all his money on all those fancy building projects in Jerusalem, as well as the space required in a camp for the Romans where Jerusalem and Judea were occupied and administered from. Thank you for listening.